everybody, and welcome to the Feminine Principle Podcast, Astrology for Authentic Living. My name is Mel with Energetic Principles.
And I'm Shawna with Neo Feminine Astrology.
And in this week's episode, we'll be discussing the astrology for the week of October 9th, and what we have titled, Building Strength and Inner Power. The purpose of this podcast is to give inspiration and guidance for this week with real-life examples of what to expect.
The three major aspects that we'll talk about today are the Sun and Mercury in Libra square Pluto, which we're calling self-mastery. We'll also talk about Jupiter moving into Scorpio, which is called Muse on the Move. And then lastly, we'll talk about Mars in Virgo square Saturn in Sagittarius, which we are calling Let's GSD, Get Shit Done.
Woo!
Yeah, a la Mel. That's the famous Mel thing.
Yes.
So please remember that some of these aspects will influence you more than others based on what's actually happening in your life and your personal astrological makeup. So notice what resonates with you most and always use your intuition and logic to decide what's best for you.
Yes. You know you best. So yeah, Shawna, let's kick off this week's episode with a quick rundown of the moon's path through the zodiac and some other minor aspects for all you astro geeks out there. Well, our lunar lady is going to continue her waning phase as we start the week in the intellectual sign of Gemini. Then on late Tuesday, Wednesday for most, she's going to move into the nurturing waters of Cancer, where she'll make her way to the last quarter moon on Thursday, which we're going to talk about much more in this episode. Also, on Friday, she's going to enter into the ready to party sign of Leo. So we have the potential for a fun weekend in store. And then we're going to close out the week with her move into down to earth Virgo on Sunday. Also of note, this week we have Venus, who's going to be moving into Libra on Saturday, October 14th at 3:11 a.m. Pacific time, which is 10:11 a.m. Universal time and 8:11 p.m. Aussie Eastern time. Also of note, we have Mercury, who will sextile Saturn and Sagittarius on Thursday and Friday, and then oppose Uranus and Aries on Sunday, which we're also going to pepper those into our discussion during the podcast today. So yeah, Shawna, tell us about the book that we have featured for this episode.
So this episode features quotes and inspiration from the book The War of Art, Break Through the Blocks and Win Your Inner Creative Battles. So this is by Stephen Pressfield, and it's a great no-nonsense guide to achieving your highest potential. It's not just for artists, although it was written with an emphasis on creative work. It's great for anyone who's very ambitious and wants to move forward and to achieve great things. So it'll be really fun and very appropriate for the aspects that we have this week. So we're excited to jump into these transits with you. One last note before we do, we want to give a shout out to our new patrons this week who just joined last week, actually, Adriana and Bailey. So thank you for becoming a patron. We really appreciate your support. And if you want to be really cool, like Adriana and Bailey, you can get these, you can become a patron and you can get the show notes every single week with all of the details of each episode, including the specific dates, the tarot cards that Mel pulls, and the quotes that we use. So you can find out more about that on our Facebook page or Instagram under Feminine Principle Podcast or at feminineprinciplepodcast.podbean.com.
Yes. And so we're so happy to have you, Adriana and Bailey. We're excited to have you on board. And so show notes are very valuable. So you can always get a sample of show notes if you want to see what they look like. And you can find that, I believe on our Instagram, and our Facebook, there is a link so you can see what that looks like. And don't forget you get the action item as well, for the week. So you can, do the homework, do your spiritual homework. So that being said, let's kick off this week's episode. And so we have, our first, segment that we'll be talking about is the Sun and Mercury in Libra, who will be squaring Pluto and Capricorn. in what we are deeming self-mastery. So some exacts on that. We're going to have, it'll be Mercury who squares Pluto first on Monday, October 9th at 5:24 a.m. Pacific time, which is 12:24 p.m. Universal time and 10:24 p.m. Aussie Eastern time. And then the Sun will square Pluto later that day on Monday, the 9th at 5:07 p.m. Pacific time, which is Tuesday the 10th at 12:07 a.m. Universal time and 10:07 a.m. Aussie Eastern time. And both of these aspects are going to be happening at 16 degrees Libra and Capricorn. So Shawna, kick us in with your quote.
So this, again, it's from The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. The paradox seems to be, as Socrates demonstrated long ago, that the truly free individual is free only to the extent of his own self-mastery, while those who will not govern themselves are condemned to find masters to govern over them. And so I love this quote for the Sun and Mercury squaring Pluto, because Pluto is about power and the Sun is about our individual energy. It's our spirit. It's that which animates us. And so when these planets come together, there is this element of working with our own energy and our own authority, our own self, and how it is that we take control of that, how it is that we use our own power. And with Pluto, sometimes there's this tendency to assign power, maybe outside of ourselves, or maybe we feel like we are powerless in a situation sometimes. And so we're like wrestling with that. Those are all themes that may come up. And what I love about this quote that I think speaks to the highest form of Sun squaring Pluto is that we're always in control of governing ourselves. And if we are not the masters of ourselves, then other people will come in to become that. And so it's always up to us to remember that we are our own masters.
Oh, so brilliant and dead on, Shawna, really. And this is coming from a person with Sun square Pluto in their chart. Apparently this is my week. I got Mars square Saturn in my chart. We're having this that week. This is directly on my sun and my moon. And I'm like, what's going on here? So to play to that power, I think that is absolutely dead on, Shawna. It is all about how we use our power, and effectively, and whether we give our power away to others. And the fact that we have this square with not only, the Sun and Mercury, we have Mercury involved too. So, there is definitely that element of power that's going to come up, and how we can use that energy, to its best ability and not be taken down by it, or taken down by, someone else's, intense energy. Cause that's essentially what it is. And you know what I find interesting, Shawna, is speaking as a Sun square Pluto person, I was having some Sun square Pluto, actually Sun opposite Pluto with the Pluto transit that we're having in Capricorn right now. And I had this dream, that I'll never forget, I was in a pet store or something, something along those lines. And I was letting a puppy free from he was on ice. He was like in a, like where you keep ice cream or something.
Yeah.
And the puppy got free and was running around. I was like, oh no, the puppy's free. What, I let it go, and this old man, which usually, older people in our dreams usually represent some type of wisdom. This old man comes out of nowhere, and he basically told me, he looked me dead in the eyes and he said, don't let the powers that be control you. And that is Pluto to the nth degree, and the Sun. And here's a perfect example of that square, and how I'd realized in my own personal life that I was essentially acquiescing my power to the situations around me rather than rising up above and like honoring the challenge that I was under, cause this is a square, and just doing what I needed to get done and doing what I needed to do for myself instead of sitting in this powerless position and letting the world pretty much pass me by based on my own inability to, grab my personal power. And so, I just wanted to share that with everybody. It even my intention. It just came to me right now. I remember that. And I think that is a very, something to take in consideration, especially during these transits, is don't let those powers that be, control you, within some respect. So Shawna, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm happy that you shared that, because I do think that dreams are very valuable in helping us understand ourselves, and especially especially when we're having transits like this, where it is a Sun and Mercury square Pluto, where there's a square, there is a need to confront something. And I remember reading somewhere that if a person has dreams where they're in like a victim or oppressive kind of state, that is typically reflecting something in their life. And Pluto, it does vacillate, like it can reflect a victim complex versus a hero complex. And so I think that it's really important that we pay attention to where it is that we feel victimized, or where we feel like someone is doing something to us and it's out of our control, and why wouldn't they just, and blah, 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 and all of these things. And, we can't always change a situation. Sometimes we are in this state of being victimized, but at the same time, there's always more that we can do. And sometimes that means, oftentimes, especially with this aspect, I would imagine that means setting a boundary or saying no, or removing ourselves from a situation that is not conducive to our power. And I think that, like you're sharing, Mel, once you were like, hey, like, this is what I need to do, and I am in charge here, I am not the victim, it can really change a lot of things in our external lives.
Right, Shawna? Because isn't that the truth? We feel victimized by certain powers that are outside of us, but at the same time, we have the personal power to release ourselves from that victimization. And if we don't, we essentially become our own victim, from the misuse of power. And that's the thing, is when we bring in the Sun and Pluto, in especially a square position, it really talks about the right use of power, and having to, really, take action around that. It doesn't come naturally. Like maybe your first inclination might not be the right use of power. Your first inclination might be, I want to blow those people up. You just feel like, I'm going to get back at you, cause Pluto is tied to, certain types of, resentment, blaming people for other things, and like kind of putting our problems and, what is falling apart in our lives, especially on other people, and kind of deflecting that a little bit. And so these are all dynamics of power that can be, misused. So speaking as a Sun square Pluto person, just know that if in these moments you feel kind of like the wrong use of power, and it feels good to feel that way, just know, like, indulge it for a second, but ultimately, let's try to send this the right direction for our own self-mastery, because, having those kind of power impulses, that are not really on the right side of things in the end, can get you in trouble.
Yes.
So that's the thing with both of these aspects, I think, is how can we use this to, rather than like go down that Pluto rabbit hole and then we're not feeling great about it afterwards, how can we own that power, step into it, and take action on it and make changes, in our life around that?
Yeah, and I think too, a part of that is the fact that Mercury is involved, and Mercury square Pluto, there is this power of perception. There's this power to really understand, whether you call it having a high quality bullshit detector, or you can just read a situation, or you get a gut feeling, like all of that stuff, our intuition is really heightened. And I think, like you're saying, Mel, sometimes though, even like we can read a situation and be like, ooh, this is really intriguing. Or like, I want to, but it's like there can be a tendency to go into things that are seductive and interesting and intriguing. But and my Scorpio people, they know what I'm talking about. My Pluto people, they know, like, oh, this is not good for me, but I still want to go there. It's like, eating too much chocolate or drinking too much wine, or, all these things that we do that are really good and delicious in the moment. But then there's repercussions. And I think that the high side of this is like using that high perception with the Mercury square Pluto, and then using it in a way that is for something greater than just our individual desires, that we're using it to help other people in some way. We're using it for something grander, kind of like being a good steward of the gifts that we do have.
Yes, I definitely agree with that, because, we're talking about some pent up energy here, essentially, is what happens. And like you're saying, Shawna, it is enticing to kind of, dabble in, certain things or certain obsessions or compulsions. Cause that's another thing with Pluto is, it kind of ties into, obsessive qualities, or like you were saying, those enticing thoughts that might not really be what we need to focus on, yet they suck you in and you become obsessed, with their, with that thought. And so just know that, especially with Mercury square Pluto right now, you could find yourself, overly obsessing over something to where you're like, something's come in your life and you're struggling with something. And, especially with Sun square Pluto and the fact that the Sun is on its last square to Pluto, during the cycle. A lot of this is probably going to be some internal tension that we're struggling through. And so especially with the Mercury, what we're thinking and what we're observing and, how we're taking all this energy in, there could be a little bit of just an obsessive quality to the mind, is like literally rolling things over and over and over. And one more time, let's keep it, and so we might have to get out of that pattern, so that we can struggle through that crisis. But, Shawna, what do you think about, the position? Since they're both in their last quarter square, with their cycles with Pluto, how do you think that plays in?
Yeah, I do think that's important, and it feels as though so the last quarter square, we've like been through the ringer with all of these issues as far as, power dynamics and manipulation and assigning our power to other people or misusing our power that we have over other people. And so it feels as though the last quarter is like a time of review and reckoning all the things that have happened over the last year or so. It feels more reflective than action oriented. And I'm wondering too, if this is, a great time where instead of like asserting our power and doing things more actively, where we go inside, more, and instead of like trying to force things and trying to like, manipulate a situation and to prove that we have our power, maybe it's more like turning our focus back on ourselves and like, ironically, I've been watching videos lately on, building a healthy sense of self and how like this works within, relationships that are either codependent or unhealthy and that kind of thing. And, a lot of what I've learned is that it's actually very healing to set aside the relationship dynamics and to go into oneself and to say, okay, like, what do I like? What do I enjoy? What is it that brings me a sense of power when I'm by myself? And so I feel like that's what this phase, this last quarter square is about, is it's like, okay, let everyone else do their thing. I'm going to come back to me and I'm going to focus on me.
Yes, I think that is some wise advice, especially in this last quarter square. It's more of an internal thing. Like, how can we go in and look at our own dynamic? Because essentially, like what we were saying earlier, Shawna, is that's what you can control. You can't control what is outside of you. And all you can control is your own response to it. And I think that this is where that last quarter energy comes in. And just for some specifics, we had that Sun, Pluto conjunction back in January 6th. At 17 degrees Capricorn. And so, in early January, we were basically setting up, these power dynamics that we're addressing today. So we had the square in April 18th, and then we had the opposition, on my birthday on July 9th.
Happy birthday.
I'm really lucky. I know. Happy birthday. Pluto's opposing your sun. Yeah. So, but that's okay. It's part of life. It's part of the learning journey. And if we didn't have it, chances are we'd be very bored, or at least I would be. So I'll take it, even if it comes with a grain of salt. But, so, you can look back at those times, January, April, July, and see where we've been making, changes in our use of power, or, where things may have come, from outside of us that have had us have to address how we use our power, and how we relinquish control around certain things. Cause that's part of it too. You gotta know when to hold them and know when to fold them,
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
So there is that. But let's take a look at what's going on Monday. Like besides these aspects, we have the moon who's going to be in Gemini, and square Neptune in Pisces, basically. So we have the Mercury square Pluto aspect, early on in the morning, at least here in Pacific time on Monday. And then we go through the whole day until we hit the sun square. So I would like to propose that, especially with Gemini, moon, is that something's going to come our way. Some type of, whether it's an internal message or, I just have a feeling that maybe someone will come to us with some constructive criticism we don't take well, kind of thing, where that comes your way and you're like, what? What do you mean? And they're probably totally right. But, that ego part, has to take that. Or perhaps you have to have a challenging or deep conversation with someone, whether it's with yourself, with a lover, a friend, a boss, whoever. And so chances are, especially the fact that the moon is in Gemini, and we're just more communicative in general, when that placement is there. I just feel that perhaps there could be some type of mercurial trigger that happens that will then allow us to tap into that sun square Pluto later in the day, and where we can really get awareness around what that power issue is, what that dynamic is. And how we can best work with that, to kind of, to rebirth our energy, in a positive way that's more balanced, a more balanced way of being, because ultimately the sun and, Mercury are in Libra, and we're just looking for some balance and harmony and, evening out our lives. And so we're evening out essentially this power dynamic. And then with Neptune involved, there's a little gray area there. And we might not see things as clearly. And perhaps certain issues emotionally need to dissolve in order for us to have that awareness. So Shawna, what do you think about that moon placement and just the possibility of, kind of having a message come to us that triggers this awareness?
Yeah, I think it seems very reasonable to assume that some type of message or some type of information will come through. As far as whether or not that information is useful, valuable to be acted upon, I don't know. Because, like you're saying, Mel, the moon square Neptune, things can be a little foggy.
Yes.
There can be so this is the thing with, what we're talking a lot about. There's the sun and Mercury in Libra, which is relationships and wanting to find balance. There's Pluto, which is power, using our power within relationships, and then this communication piece. So like all of this stuff all mashed together. I would be very wary and be very discerning of the information that it is that we're receiving. So it's like, okay, is the person that's giving me the information or the situation, are they projecting onto me? Is it their stuff that they're putting onto me, or are they being very accurate and I'm filtering it through my lens and I'm being defensive or judgmental? And so I think that's really hard to figure out in the moment sometimes. So I would err on the side of receiving the information and then like letting ourselves sort it out and sit with it. I think that especially when there's a Pluto transit, we can't always take things at face value because there's a lot of other unconscious material that's going on. And so, I think that the information that we do receive will be important, but as far as like what it actually means and what to do with it, you know, that may be something that we reflect on for a little while.
I think that's valuable advice, Shawna, because ultimately these two transits, and especially with that Sun square Pluto, is essentially testing us on how we use our energy.
Yes.
And so if you get that something and you fly off the handle, you know, are you using that energy right? Probably not. Mm-hmm. And like you said, Shawna, maybe what's coming to us is not quite clear, or doesn't you know, maybe is not even the truth, or you know, there could be something there, and then this test happens and you misuse your power, and then you feel even like at the end of the day you're like, oh man, why did I do that? You know, like you know, so I think that's very valuable advice to basically just take it in and process it. Understand it internally before taking any action on it, and then find the best use of your own power within that situation, whatever that may be, whether that is confronting a person or walking away from a situation, or you know, being like, I don't have to listen to what you say, it doesn't resonate with me, or maybe I should listen to what you say because you're probably a little bit right and I need to honor that. And, you know, these are the types of things that come up. But ultimately we are the ones, choosing how we respond to the situation. And essentially Monday will be just a test of your own. And it's not just Monday. It's probably through the weekend. And I know you guys are going to get this, on Sunday. And it will last a couple days afterwards. But we basically have a little chunk of days where we are being tested upon the right use of power and the right use of power within our words and our communications. And so how can we use this constructively? Is just stay positive and find that Libran balance that we're looking for. And especially along the lines of, cause we have Pluto and Capricorn. So yeah, it could definitely tie into, relationships and our right control, there. But it can also, tap into, our goals and our ambitions, what we've been working for, and the decisions we've been making, around those, issues. Because, you know, we just came off that, Jupiter-Uranus opposition, in Libra and Aries. And so, that's another issue that has been on the table. And so we've all been making these choices or trying to make choices in our lives, to, kind of rebirth ourselves and renew ourselves in certain areas, especially around our goals and what we're going for. So these are the different ways we can tap into this energy, and it's going to look different for everybody that's involved, you know, depending on what your chart looks like. So yeah. So what do you think, Shawna? What do you think about all that?
Yeah. So I think you're right. I think that the energy that we're coming off of always, informs what it is that's happening now, because it's like the past informs the present, informs the future. And so, Jupiter opposed Uranus, there is this, like, the last few weeks where we've been like opened up to new possibilities. And so it feels as though now it's like, okay, now that we've had all these new opportunities and, like a different perspective on things as well, where do we want to focus our energy, and what's the highest quality way that we can focus our energy for the highest and best good? I think that this aspect in particular, it's always important to notice, like, this will be really important for people who are already having a Pluto transit. So like, you know, you and I, Mel, we're both having Pluto transits. And
in the thick
anytime,
of it.
like, so there's already the energy is already active around all of these issues for those people. And then when the Sun and Mercury comes in, it amplifies it even more, and it can create like, the need to make a decision. And I'm reminded of when I've experienced moments like this, how important it feels to really be discerning with the use of my energy and my focus. And so, I think that is even more so important because we've had the Jupiter and Uranus opposition the last few weeks. And so that has brought possibly a lot of new opportunities and new awarenesses. And so things are more open now, maybe than they were over the past few months.
That's an excellent way of looking at it, Shawna. And I'm looking at the chart right now. And, when we have these aspects, Jupiter is at 29 degrees Libra. It is about to leave Libra, which we're going to talk about in a second. But this is, any 29th degree, essentially is a test of that energy as it moves out of there. And so we're basically getting tested around our own growth and how we have, adapted to our situations and how they've, basically morphed, in our lives in the past year and especially in this past, Pluto cycle since January. So I feel like, when you were saying earlier, Shawna, that there's almost like a testing type of situation, or you might have to make a decision based on certain information and having to go forward. Because essentially we're talking about squares, which is action. It's a turning point of some sort. And it's a developmental pressure that is placed upon us. And I think with Jupiter hanging out there at 29 degrees and 46 minutes, the pressure is on. And so I feel like there's going to be some Libran pressure there that we are going to be sifting through. And there's just it's a hefty day. We have Mars and Venus are essentially still conjunct in Virgo, and they're in a T square with Saturn and Chiron. And so we're actively working through, old issues and old, painful things that might come up that might trigger us to basically use our power one way or the other. Or, cause sometimes old pains that we hold onto or old triggers, don't allow us to even step into our power because, we feel this pain and we kind of sit with it. And that pain can mean anything for anybody. It's just whatever triggers you to make you feel kind of like, to feel wounded in a sense to where you can't take action. So I feel like, this is a really pivotal moment for us to really work past some, prior wounding that we might have or certain issues that trigger, us in our lives. And we can really take action to kind of, to heal those things and bring more balance. If we're going to look at this as positively as possible, because that's essentially what we're looking for. So Shawna, how do you think, Chiron, in that Saturn, that T-square dynamic might kind of play in a little?
Yeah. So I think this adds another layer of the relationship dynamic because with Mars and Venus, to me, that says relationships, attraction, what we're drawn to or what we are repulsed by. With Saturn, it's like, okay, where is the limit? Where is the boundary? How are these things how are our relationships helping us versus hindering us? And Chiron is like, okay, what's that? Where is it repetitive? Where is the, in yoga philosophy, it's the samskara, where's the groove that we always go into? Saturn can also be considered like a groove, a pattern. And, are these patterns helpful? Are they harmful? And how do we want to continue to build upon them? I think that we don't always have to, and I think sometimes it's impossible to, completely get rid of an old pattern. I think that they're so deeply embedded that it serves us to know them so that we can navigate them instead of trying to wash everything away. And so I think, that the T-square with Mars and Venus and Saturn and Chiron is okay, what's the reality here? And, how do I get to know my own grooves? How do I get to know my own patterns and work with them in a healthy way?
Yes, especially because it's an opposition with Chiron, that Venus and Mars, how can we get this bird's eye view? How can we, react differently to certain triggers? And then essentially, heal ourselves in the process. And you're right, Shawna, those triggers are always going to be there. And it's part of each and every one of our journeys. It's just, we become more aware of them. And that's what oppositions can do. Oppositions make you aware of things. And then you can take action on the right way to react to such things and not fall in those patterns anymore. A pattern might still arrive. However, you just now know, and you'll increasingly have more confidence to not react in certain ways that you might have before. And then that becomes a pattern. You're like, I have this pattern of doing this, but my new pattern is reacting like this. And so hopefully we'll get that around a positive way, and we'll be able to really make these Pluto lessons a healing challenge, because who doesn't want that? Let's heal ourselves, and especially how we use our power. So that being said, let's talk about some of these tarot cards real quick, because I think that the tarot really puts a whole nother spin on these transits. And so I got the 9 of Cups as the focus and the 7 of Wands as the grounding. And, there's a couple different ways of looking at this. I feel like it's really tapping into our own inner strength to go after what it is that we wish for. Because essentially that 7 of Wands is a spiritual test in a sense, to where we have to stay true to our purpose and our goals. And a lot of times, those might be challenged, with someone else's, viewpoint on the situation. And there's some type of obstacle essentially around what it is that we desire. And we have to essentially focus on, that obstacle can be rough, but we have to focus on what we have and not what we lack in a sense. And so I feel like there's really a spiritual test around what it is that we want. And if we haven't figured that out, then the spiritual test might be around figuring out what it is that we truly want and desire. So Shawna, how do you look at these two cards, placed together?
Yeah. So to me, these say that it's really important, like you're saying, Mel, that we go after what we want that brings us a sense of deep fulfillment and not surface level fulfillment. Like not necessarily, it could be material things, but not necessarily material things. Like what is it that we're doing for, like, to make the world a better place even? And there may be a little bit of, challenge or like healthy conflict engagement that needs to happen through that. The 9 of Cups to me is like, okay, what do you really want? And not from like a selfish place. It needs to come from this place of like really wanting to do something that feels meaningful in the world. And that does not mean that it needs to look a certain way. Like art can be very meaningful. Cooking food can be very, very meaningful, whatever it is for you. And then the 7 of Wands, there is this test or challenge, or there's a need for us to like, maybe, like not play passively in a certain way. We need to be assertive. And that doesn't mean that we're unkind, but we need to like say no where we need to say no. And we need to say yes where we want to say yes.
That right there, Shawna. Right there. Cause that's true. That's the thing is like, especially with the 7 of Wands, others may have plans outside of you that affect what it is that you want. Sometimes we have to stand tall within ourselves, and just listen so that we know what the right action is to take, like not fly off the handle. Cause, the 7 is a spiritual number. And so it's good to kind of observe and listen to what's, kind of happening to us. And then really tie that into, like you were saying earlier, Shawna, what it is that fulfills us and what it is, that we see for ourselves. Because what we want and what we desire, no one can tell us what that is. Only we know what it is we truly want. And at that point, we have a responsibility to ourselves to honor that. And if you don't honor that, then you're on the wrong side of Pluto. You're not being honest with yourself. You're not being, you're not in a space of integrity. And so we really have to focus on what it is that we want. And like you were saying earlier, Shawna, when we first got into this transit, the 9 of Wands, the 9 of Cups is essentially is a card where we can look at our present situation, and see that it essentially is a fulfillment of our past dreams and wishes. What has come before is a culmination of everything we've been wishing and desiring. And so how does that look now? And so how can we reflect upon that? And if it's not exactly how you thought it was going to turn out, or it's time to start a new cycle of what you really wish for now, then this is where we are being essentially spiritually tested to do so. So yeah. So just some takeaway questions for these Pluto transits that we're having. I would ask myself, how well do I take constructive criticism? Could those outside suggestions provide a closer step towards self-mastery? I would ask myself, where are my desires being spiritually tested? How can I remain focused and positive for inner harmony? And then lastly, I would ask, how can I effectively work with the intense energy in the air? Can I ride the wave of challenge to rebirth my own inner strength? So let's ride that Pluto wave the best we know how. Ride it, it might be a little rocky. You might tumble into the surf a few times, but just know you got to get back on that board and just keep on going.
Yep.
So Shawna, let's segue into the segment of Jupiter, who's moving into Scorpio. This is big news. This doesn't happen every day. And so we are titling Jupiter's move into Scorpio, Muse on the Move. And Jupiter will make its move on Tuesday, October 10th at 6:20 a.m. Pacific time, which is 1:20 p.m. Universal Time and 11:20 p.m. Aussie Eastern Time. And of course, that's moving into 0 degrees Scorpio. So Shawna, kick us in with your next quote from The Art of War.
So in this section, he's talking about how when we dedicate ourselves to a goal, when we do the work, then the muse will show up. We have invoked the muse since time immemorial. There is great wisdom in this. There is magic to effacing our human arrogance and humbly entreating help from a source we cannot see, hear, touch, or smell. And so I thought this was so perfect for Jupiter moving into Scorpio, because Jupiter basically shows us where there is a certain element of synchronicity, a certain element of things just coming together at the right moment, at the right time. And Jupiter's opportunity, its inclusion, its expansion, it's bringing everything to the table. And oftentimes when there's an aspect with Jupiter, whether that's in your natal chart or out in the sky, there's like this where something just kind of clicks and it just comes out of nowhere and you're like, whoa, where did this come from? It's all of these things are the energy of the muse, where we get an idea, we get an inspiration, and it just feels a little bit not just magical, but also gracious, very generous, which is also Jupiterian. And so as Jupiter moves from Libra into Scorpio, it becomes even more this thing that we may not be able to see, hear, touch, or smell, but it's like it's there. It's very deep and very rich. And so I'm excited about this because it feels like a more intense and deep manifestation of Jupiter as it moves into Scorpio. And so, yeah, that's that.
Yeah. No, it's true. I'm ready for it as well, because Jupiter in Libra has maybe it's just because I'm a Cancer Capricorn mixture and Scorpio rising, Jupiter has not been in the best place for me. But at the same time, maybe it has. That's the thing. It's like Jupiter is, like you're saying, it's had that synchronicity, it's got that good fortune, it's got that right place, right time. And good fortune is really debatable. And that's the thing, is like Jupiter can bring you the best of fortune that might not seem like the fortune you want. But in the end, the synchronicity happened to take you, to broaden your horizons into another realm that maybe in the moment when it happens, it doesn't really seem like good fortune. But in the end, it was the best fortune you could have asked for. So just keep that in mind with Jupiter in general, and especially as Jupiter moves into Scorpio, because we are talking, like you're saying, Shawna, this is a deeper realm. This is a realm that you cannot really, you can't, rationalize this realm as we were able to with Libra, where we gave, equal, sides to point of views and people's logic and people's reasons. And, and we could see things like, well, I logically see it this way, and I'll let you have your argument because this is fair and this is balanced, and so Scorpio comes along and it's like, okay, well, we're going to get deep here. We're not going to have this surface level back and forth. It's like, how can we transmute these issues? Especially because Jupiter represents, the worldview. It represents beliefs, culture, politics. And essentially as it moves through these signs in its yearly fashion as it does, it basically reshapes all those things to be in the context of now. And so we are now in a new reshaping phase, and that's in Scorpio. And Scorpio is a water sign. It likes to merge. It likes the depths. It's, a very fluid, like you were saying, Shawna, it's like this it's an area is not as easily able to touch. And so that's why I think Jupiter in, Scorpio in this next year is going to be so, such an opportunity to dive into our own psychological, underpinnings in a sense, and really, ferret those things out, so that we can bring more good fortune in our lives and be able to respond to our fortune, in a more positive way, for growth. So Shawna, how do you see those things kind of coming into play, and especially the psychological element of Scorpio?
Yeah. So I feel like when any planet transitions from Libra to Scorpio, it is kind of like a rude awakening almost, because Libra is like, let's all be friends, let's get along, even if I don't, I don't like you as much, or I don't agree with you, but we can still play nice and we can still be friends and it's all cool. And then Scorpio is like, oh no, like, I don't like you. Or I really fucking like you and I want to be obsessed with you. It goes from it's this transition from wanting to keep everything balanced and wanting to find a sense of, justice even. And then moving into no nonsense, no bullshit, like what's actually happening here and what's actually important. And, it goes to more dramatic polarities on off. I love it. I hate it. And that kind of thing. And so, I think that when Jupiter was in Libra, we were trying to find a sense of, balance and a sense of, what's fair and what's just and what brings us a sense of peace. Whereas with Jupiter in Scorpio over the next year, I think that you're right, Mel. It is going to be more about plumbing through the depths of our psychological health and how it is that our sense of optimism and the opportunities that we have in our life, how those are actually very, very connected to our psychological well-being and how it is that we process emotions, and the way that we view the world based on all of our past experiences. And so I think that I know that sounds really heavy and intense, but I think that may be a chance to really work with some powerful, manifestation practices.
I agree. And if we want to jump into Scorpio a little earlier and the no bullshit meter, it is intense. We're not going to get around this. Like there's no way to sugarcoat Scorpio.
No.
Speaking from a Scorpio rising, let me tell you, there's plenty of sugar, but you can't sugarcoat it. Cause it's deep. It's still waters run deep, essentially, and this is going to be a time that, a very fertile time. That's the thing is it's a water sign. So this is very fertile time for us to work with these energies, and understand them better and understand our own psychological psychological motivations, and what it is we're passionate about. Because that's the thing too, is that, Scorpio is passionate. It is, it's a water sign, but it's passionate due to its intensity. And its obsessive nature, if we can balance those obsessions to work as a passion and not a detriment in a sense. Mm-hmm. But like you're saying, Shawna, it really is all or nothing. Like that's the thing with Scorpio is it's black and white. And this is where it'll be very interesting to see how this, next year plays out, especially on a world, level, because Jupiter does represent the world view. Like that's what it is. It's the worldview. It's the law. It's how we reform things. It's where our moral judgments lie. And these are the types of things that are going to be moving into Scorpio. And so I really think, especially with that no bullshit meter, I think a lot of politics is going to be, we've already been, working through the dredges and put like, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is right now. I just see mud and extracting it. So whatever that word is. So we've already been kind of there. But now I really feel that, the politics is, if anybody's trying to BS the people, especially, we're going to see it. Everybody's going to have their X-ray glasses on, during Jupiter and Scorpio. And we're just going to have a lot more insight into what is going on a grander scale. And so, that might be a little overwhelming, but it's so fruitful. And especially since we're talking about the Pluto transits earlier, and Jupiter moves into Scorpio, and Scorpio is also, the right use of using your power constructively. And so this really feels like a whole week where we're, tapping into, especially Mars squaring Saturn, which we'll talk about in a little bit. It feels like how we use our power is really on the forefront this week. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking that too, Mel. I was thinking how this week it's really interesting how we have the Plutonian energy, which we talked about, and then Jupiter the very same week is moving into a sign that is ruled by Pluto, depending on which rulership you use. But there's this Scorpionic Pluto kind of, okay, how do we focus our energy? How do we use, our psychic resources? And I think you're right. It will be a very like the bullshit will be out on display, because when Jupiter is in Scorpio next year in 2018, it's also going to sextile Pluto, and it's going to trine Neptune. And so, both of those, are like blowing up the shadow, blowing up the cultural unconscious. And, I think that it depends also on where Jupiter is in our chart and which house it's transiting through. I think that makes a big difference for people. And, so like we can look at it collectively. And then also personally, that I found actually before we recorded this, I looked at the whole cycle of Jupiter through my chart, the past many years. And it's really interesting to see, because if you're using whole sign houses, you would just look at the house, where you have Scorpio. And so it's, you can kind of plan out your whole next year to focus on those types of things within that house. And then with a Scorpionic vibe, which is getting into, understanding your power and using your psychological and intuitive capacities.
Yeah. Absolutely. Scorpio, how can we dig deep? How can we dive in there? Shawna, you're right. You should look at where, Scorpio is in your chart. And so where Jupiter is going to be moving through. And if you need help with that, these are the types of things that we are here for. And so we're kind of talking about, it's funny, we're talking about all this and we're talking about the positive sides of Scorpio. And the reality is that, there's another shadow side of Scorpio. And with Jupiter, when Jupiter moves through things, it grandizes, it magnifies, it it turns it up a notch. And so we have to be aware of where we're turning things up a notch, in our lives, so that we, don't end on the shadow side of Scorpio where, cause Scorpio can be a little dark and moody, can be brooding and likes to replay old transgressions, things that, those kind of Plutonian issues, of things that have happened to us. We like to replay those in our mind. It's like this, never ending, film reel that's going on of everybody that's ever wronged me. And then you have things such as, jealousy or being obsessed over something, or being ultimately secretive or suspicious or skeptical. These are the types of things that can come out, with a shadow, energy of Scorpio. So just be aware of those things. And if you feel like you're like, I've never been a jealous person in my life, and all of a sudden I'm just jealous out to a T, it's Jupiter and Scorpio. These are just issues that we're working with, for this year so that we can heal certain things. Like, I really feel this transit can be ultimately healing on so many ways if we allow it to be. So yeah. You were saying, or Shawna, the last time Jupiter was in Scorpio was in, 2005, 2006?
Mm-hmm.
Is that when?
October 2005 through November 2006.
Yeah. So if, I'm sure all of us listening are old enough to remember that time to some extent. So yeah, go back to that. Yeah. Go back 2005, 2006, especially 2006. And remember what was happening for you then. And you might get a little glimpse into, it's not the same thing is going to happen again because we all evolve and we work onto new issues, but you can kind of feel like the timbre of what was, happening during that time and what you can look out for this next year. So.
Yeah, I do think it's important to consider the shadow side, like you say, Mel, and the more that we can find tools to siphon out some of those things, or to become more aware of where we do have jealousy or guilt or resentment, that can really serve us to move through in a more harmonious way.
Yeah, because we want harmony here, people, right? We want to be on the. Well, because it's so funny, with another shadow side of Scorpio is really, sometimes you can be so fixated on something because it's a fixed sign. And that passion gets fixed and you can be so fixated on something and you just pursue these goals endlessly, even though they're not even satisfying anymore. You're like unsatisfied, but I'm still focused on this because I've dedicated myself, because Scorpio is incredibly loyal to a fault and can have extreme trust, in situations or other people to where maybe they shouldn't. And so that's another thing we might be looking at within this next year is, where do we put our trust? Where do we put our trust in other people? Because we're talking about, Scorpio realms, and that is, that can be tied into shared resources and how we share things with other people and we bring, our collaborations together. And we trust other people and we're loyal to another person. And so these types of issues can come up as well. And we might be, forced to focus on who and what we put our trust in and whether or not that is essentially satisfying. So that is another side of, shadow side of Scorpio that we might be working with. So that being said, Shawna, let's talk about these tarot cards. There's some interesting ones we got here. We got two major arcana cards for, Jupiter and Scorpio. We got Judgment as the focus. This judgment just keeps coming back. And the Hermit as the grounding. So yeah, Shawna, we can't shake this judgment. It is essentially, which is so funny because Scorpio, can be very judgmental. And, I'm taking a literal transit here. It's not the tarot card doesn't quite mean that. But I just found it kind of funny that, that being said. So, this, like we were talking about psychologically wise and being able to go within in those depths that we normally might not be able to access. I feel like that's where we can get these Judgment and the Hermit, we might have realizations, very poignant ones that lead us to endings or beginnings in our life, that we're able to come to based on introspection. And that introspection, can then, in turn lead us to that self-mastery and that newfound wisdom, that we are really tapping into this week. This is just the start of the Jupiter transit, but we got that Pluto, vibe going on. And we're about to talk about this Mars square Saturn. And so yeah, I feel like that is, we're once again back to this calling, and to be really honest with ourselves and to renew our lives and rebirth our lives in some way. So Shawna, how do you look at these two cards placed together?
Yeah, so I think these are such Scorpio flavored cards. I think the Judgment speaks to needing to look at ourselves more honestly and to look at, cause the thing with Scorpio is it's very protective. It's protective of the tender parts of ourselves that we don't want to share with everyone. And so, I think these cards reflect a calling to get more acquainted with the parts of ourselves that maybe we don't share with others or that we don't like as much, and to do that by having a lot of introspection and to be that hermit, either maybe literally or just metaphorically. Maybe we do a lot more introspective work than we're used to, or maybe we take more time to ourselves. But it's definitely a looking inward message that I'm getting from these.
Yes, it's absolutely about looking inward. And, and I think it's a little bit about relying on yourself in a sense, because the Hermit is a very solitary character. And I feel that, if you trust in yourself and you rely on yourself and your own resources, your resourcefulness, essentially, and I think your integrity will guide you, as you step into that power and go within and really, cipher out what it is, that is really meaningful, to you. And cause, Judgment calls upon that as well. What is, you have a realization in a sense. It's like coming to terms with something. And so we have this really fruitful, year to really dive deep, into get us more in line with our own integrity, which can in turn really lead us to our own personal freedom, from certain things or certain psychological issues that we might have been dealing with, or things that hold us back in the past. To get that renewal of healing, because that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that rebirth. We're looking, especially on a spiritual level. So we need to look out for those things. And I also would like to say that, it's because to tap back into that shared resources thing, another element of the Hermit is the Hermit really learns not to waste its time and energy on other people that aren't deserving of it. And this is a thing where, Scorpio can be very giving and loyal in a sense. And if you have the misguided loyalties, chances are you might just be wasting your time and energy on something that is really not going to be, fruitful in the long run. And so I feel like part of this is, also calling us to just get aligned with more people that are, on our level, and get rid of all the situations where we waste our time, we waste our energy, and we're just wasting our resources on people that don't deserve it. So I don't know. What do you think about that, Shawna?
Yeah, I think that's totally on point, especially with the shift from Libra or over to Scorpio, because Libra can have a tendency to entertain situation, people, places, things that are not necessarily helpful. And so this move from that to over care for others, which is, sometimes the shadow side of Libra, we're moving into making ourselves a priority. And that's not because we're selfish. It's because we only have so much energy to go around. And so we want to use it in the best way possible. And so I think that I love that message for this transit.
Yes, let's use our energy wisely as we are learning this week. So that being said, I know, right? Amen to that. So some questions to take away for Jupiter entering Scorpio. I would ask myself, how can I use this next year to tap into my inner muse to find my own wellspring of creation? Because Jupiter, and Scorpio are very creative aspects. I would ask myself, can I make the time to go in and access this period of fertile introspection so I come out with increased wisdom and integrity? And then lastly, I would ask, will I allow myself to find good fortune within the shared resources of others? How can we join forces to bring abundance to all?
I love that.
And that just might be my idealistic self, but hey, one can hope. So all right, we are talking today. So let's wrap this up here with our last transit. We're going to be talking about Mars, who is in Virgo, will be squaring Saturn in Sagittarius. And and so we are titling that, Let's GSD. Let's get shit done. So some exacts for that. We will have this, Mars square Saturn on Wednesday, October 11th at 6:37 a.m. Pacific time, which is 1:37 p.m. Universal time and 11:37 p.m. Aussie Eastern time. And that's going to happen at 22 degrees Virgo and Sagittarius. Also of note, for the day after, we have the last quarter moon in Cancer, which will be on Thursday, the 12th at 5:25 a.m. Pacific time, which is 12:25 p.m. Universal time and 10:25 p.m. Aussie Eastern time. And that's going to happen at 19 degrees Cancer. So we just wanted to get that in there because I think this is very much an element, a part of this, transit. So, Shawna, share with us your last quote.
So in this, section, he's talking about fear. Fear is good. Like self-doubt, fear is an indicator. Fear tells us what we have to do. Remember our rule of thumb. The more scared we are of a work or calling, the more sure we can be that we have to do it. And so I read this and I was like, this is perfect for Mars Saturn because Mars, it is about assertiveness. It's about courage, but Mars can also be a reflection of fear. And even like this self-doubt or insecurity. And when Mars squares Saturn, it's even more so can bring up a sense of, fear or trepidation or, because it's a call to engage with something. So Saturn brings limitation. Saturn also asks us to commit to something. And so I feel like this aspect, because it's a square, there is something that we need to confront, and it may involve a challenge, something that we need to stand up for, something that we need to kind of like, take an emotional risk with, that we need to like, we need to put ourselves out there. We need to up level. We need to really go for it. And so I feel like that quote was really perfect for this combination.
I totally agree. When I read that quote, I was like, speaking as someone with Mars squared Saturn in my chart, I really identified with that. And it's true. It's like you can use your fear meter. I mean, within reason, of course. There's some things to be fearful of. But when we're fearful of things that really we shouldn't be fearful of, that is absolutely an indicator of, you're just scared. You got the fear, false evidence appearing real, and you just have to, move past that. And the fact that we have, Mars square Saturn on not the same day, but the day before we have the last quarter moon in Cancer. Cause the moon will be in Cancer, when we have the square as well. It'll be in the early degrees. And so, Cancer is not always the energy known for, like it doesn't have that Aries quality where it's like, I will tackle this crisis and I will go forth and be a hero. But Cancer might be like, I'm going to just tuck into this shell and I will see you in 2 days. And so these are the types of things that might come up right now and where we might be challenged. We might have to take action around something, cause this is also a last quarter square with the cycle of Mars and Saturn. So it's once again kind of an internal crisis that happens. It's not like I don't think things on the outside will be all, sure, there could be frustrations on the outside, but I think a lot of what's going to transpire is this kind of internal frustration. Cause that's essentially what it is, there can be some frustration there, speaking from experience. But ultimately it's really about tapping into and taking action on ways we can discipline ourselves and keep the endurance that is required to carry on with certain things that we are working on. And I think that's a lot of what the theme is here this week. So Shawna, what do you think about the discipline endurance part of this transit, and also how that Cancer last quarter might kind of play into how that plays out?
Yeah, I love the word that you use, discipline, endurance. I love that word too. 'Cause I feel like whenever there's Saturn, it's like, okay, we're in this for the long game. And it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And so this week, I think that because especially this is happening mid to later in the week, I think that it's so important that we remind ourselves that everything that we're working on, it's not urgent, but it's still very important. And it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So it's like, okay, we need to do the things that we need to do. And it's not important that we have everything perfect right now. It's not important that we necessarily make outer progress. It's more important, like you're saying, Mel, that we have the inner process, that we do what it is that lays the foundation for a really strong and sturdy future going forward.
Cause it's true, we're talking about Saturn and Sagittarius. We're looking at these big picture views. We're looking at these big picture goals, what we envision for ourselves, these long range plans. And we've all been trying to put some type of form around them. And, the fact that Mars is in Virgo is, if form can be had, it can be had here. And we can really do a lot of, simple things in our life, and little steps that, if we can, get past that fear, like you were saying, Shawna, that fear to kind of take action in certain areas, especially having to do with our dreams and these long range plans we have. I feel like these baby steps that could happen during this transit, can be really what pushes us forward for when we have that conjunction, because eventually Mars is going to conjunct, Saturn, and we're going to start the cycle all over again. So how can we take those practical steps, those, mundane steps on an earthly realm where we make the calls we need to make, or we do the project that we need to do, or we plan certain things, plan our actions out, cause Virgo likes to plan. And so does Saturn. And we have these, what's great about it is we have, so earlier on in the week, we have Mercury who is squaring Pluto, and we're going through this, kind of, dealing with how we view our own power in our mind and how we take control of our mind, where people might give us constructive criticism, messages might challenge, issues of power. And then Mercury is going to move on to sextile Saturn in Sagittarius. So while this is happening, Mercury is forming a sextile. So even though our energy and our assertion and that Mars go-getiveness is being challenged by this energy, our mind is on board. Our mind's like, okay, so we got to work this out. I'm ready to focus. My concentration is here. let's complete things. Let's get things done, cause that's a last, sextile before that's the end of a cycle too. So I feel like there's a lot of these little things that need to happen for certain kind of completions in our life so that we can, wrap certain things up and start again. So I really feel that the fact that we have that, Mercury sextile to Saturn, around the same time of this last quarter moon, hopefully that rational element of Mercury is going to be able to get us past maybe these, sensitive emotional hiccups that we might have with that moon in Cancer. So what do you think about that, Shawna? How that might play in?
Yeah, just like our title says, it's time to get shit done. And, these are some of the last aspects that, planets will be making to Saturn while it's in the sign of Sagittarius. It'll be moving out of Sagittarius, next year. And so it's like, okay, yeah, what do we need to do? What do we need to do to make this sense of completion? And I think that the more that we engage with being responsible and doing what we know is the right thing to do, as much as we can, at least, the more that we're going to feel empowered through the process. I think that the two sides of Saturn, and Mars even, are that we can sometimes feel like oppressed or depressed or like we have no options. And I find that happens with people when we're trying to avoid a situation where it's something that's really hard and there really is no, fun decision, or, no matter what it is, it's like the lesser of two evils. And so when we don't decide to do anything, when we don't engage, we can actually feel very powerless. And so I think that the high side of that, especially because, oh my gosh, it's Mars, so to actually see the fear and say, okay, I'm really afraid, or I don't want to do this, but I'm going to do it anyways because it's the right thing to do. I think that can actually be like really, really strengthening, and it can build a lot of confidence. So I would watch for, how it is that we're feeling. And if we're feeling insecure, we just need to do some action. We just need to do something that will actually build the confidence.
Yeah, I think that's definitely some valuable advice, because that vulnerability and that insecurity can definitely come up when we're talking about a last quarter moon in Cancer.
Yeah.
And once again, we're on the other side of the cycle. We're on these wrapping up sides. So this whole week seems to be so internal. I really feel like a lot of this is happening on the inside, and we're just trying to push through it. We're just trying to work through it. Because, essentially this Mars, in Virgo, like we were saying earlier in the episode, is, stellar orb with Venus and is in a T-square with Chiron and Saturn. And so we have these little wounds that are coming up this week that are really asking us to push through. We're like, okay, it's time to push through these things. We have that Mercury sextile to Saturn, which is allowing us to kind of weigh the pros and cons of our own actions. Like our mind is, okay, let's get real here. Let's really work, let's find a place of balance, cause we have this, Mercury in Libra, who is trying to balance out what it is we're going after and, maybe get rid of certain things that we, shouldn't be taking action on. And so there could be a square around that, to where, cause chances are, speaking from this square natally, there could be a delay that comes up at this time. Like we might be trying to get shit done, but something outside of us or something within us won't let us do it. And so just know that this is the time not to actually try to control things. Learning from experience, let me tell you, backfire. Let it go. Be flexible as possible, because sometimes that delay is actually going to work in your favor, and you're going to be in a better place by honoring the fact that you can't do anything, and working in areas to where you can. And that's the tricky thing, is like a lot of times, and speaking from experience, what happens is that we get these delays. We get these delays in our plans and our big picture and what it is that we want to do. And so sometimes the easy thing is to give up. But that's not going to be the easy thing in the long run. And really that's where we are challenged with the idea of discipline and endurance, because delays come up, and that doesn't mean that it's the end of the road. It means like you just have to carry on, keep calm and carry on, essentially. Yep. So I feel like that is definitely an element that could come up right now. So whether or not you have that delay, or you're able to just like push past fear, insecurity, and being vulnerable in some way, and really getting the shit done that you need to get done. And you're going to feel so much better for it in the long run, because, you know, Shawna, we have Saturn in Sagittarius, who is in a perfect trine with the North Node, and then Uranus. So the things that we're being pushed towards, and the obstacles that we are being challenged with to push past, they're all for our own good. They're tied into our own growth and how we're moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's wise advice, with being flexible, engaging, but then being flexible and not trying to force things.
Yes. And it's a fine line. You gotta know where to put your right action. And if you're an aware person, like I think that every one of our listeners are, you're going to know one way or the other. So just follow that internal, meter, and go from there. And it's so interesting, to finish our kind of mercurial journey, we have, Mercury, after it sextiles Saturn, on Thursday, it's going to be in opposition to Uranus on Sunday. And so I have a feeling that once we make it through all this week and all these issues, I think new ideas are really going to come to us. That's going to leave us up to be like excited about certain things. And we might have new thoughts that we're like, oh, well, I've worked through this issue, and now I have these new ideas coming to me. And how can I like go forward in this area? It's almost like we become more aware of new and innovative ways for growth now that we have made it through this hump, in a sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And it speaks to, like you were saying, sometimes the delay is actually in your favor because something happens, or there's something unexpected that you didn't plan for that occurs later.
Yes. Because you can't always plan for it, right, Shawna?
Nope.
You can't always plan for it. So that being said, let's move into the tarot cards real quick here. So for Mars square Saturn, I've got the Sun, or the Knight of Cups, as the focus, and the Empress card as the grounding. And I really have to say, I think a lot of this card combination kind of ties into that last quarter moon, and the fact that it's in Cancer and that water sign. If I want to look at the high side of these cards together, like I would say, how can we lead with our heart right now to make active changes for growth? Because essentially that's what the Empress wants. It wants us to nurture our growth in some way. And that could be around a new project or something that we're working on. So how can we, follow our heart and not let that get too, cause sometimes the heart is a sensitive thing. And sometimes there can be fear around, leading with the heart and putting yourself out there and being that vulnerable, person. So we have to learn, the emotional ropes, in a sense, to kind of get past that so that we can, take action and get in a better place for prosperity, which, the Empress essentially wants for us. Shawna, how do you see these two cards play together?
Yeah, so they really do speak to this encouragement to take emotional risks, I think. I think that's the Sun of Cups, is it's like you're saying, Mel, okay, what is it that we're really feeling and that maybe feels like exciting, but a little bit vulnerable to pursue? And then the Empress is such a beautiful encouragement that, yes, like pursue that, because it is something that is ripe with potential, and that there's a lot of creative juice behind that. So whatever it is that we're excited about, it's good to pursue that.
Yeah, I agree. This is a very artistic combination. So if you feel the need to create, later on in the week or the weekend, get in there, because chances are it's going to be very fertile. Especially with that Mercury, opposition to Uranus on Sunday. Something might come out of the woodwork, so you're like, wow, cool.
Yeah.
The only thing I would say lastly, just to tie into these cards real quick, maybe on a shadow side of things, cause the sun can be a bit brooding. So just watch for this tendency. So if you're actively just kind of in a moody zone and you're, you don't nurture that with the Empress, let's nurture in a way that, helps and not hurts. I think ultimately, we can really tie into our heart and come up with some creative solutions, to, get ourselves out there more. So that being said, just some questions to take away. I would ask myself, what is my heart trying to accomplish? Am I dedicated to taking action to help nurture and protect that growth? I would ask myself, if obstacles come my way, how can I relieve frustration and avoid brooding? How can I nurture myself and stay positively focused? That's what we want. Positive focus.
Yeah.
Definitely. And then lastly, I tie into that quote here. Even when fear or self-doubt arises, how can I tap into my endurance and stamina to get shit done?
Ooh, that's a perfect question.
How can we do it?
Yep.
How can we do it? So Shawna, what have we learned? Oh my God. So many things. All the things. Well, we've learned that Sun and Mercury are going to square Pluto, and it is time for self-mastery. And how we use our power is going to be in question. We've learned that Jupiter moves into Scorpio and the muse is on the move, and it's time to go into the watery depths where we're going to get a much deeper, than we have during the Libra phase. And then we're gonna, we learned that Mars is gonna square Saturn, and we're gonna have that first quarter moon in Cancer towards the end of the week, and we're going to need to get shit done. We're going to need to move past fear or insecurity or any type of vulnerability, and do what we can to take action in our lives, on the big picture. So Shawna, I know you have an excellent action item to share with our listeners, so please share.
I do. So this is a simple one. It's a writing exercise. I want you to write down a list of all the ways or all of the situations where you feel powerful. And so this may seem a little bit tricky at first. It's something where you can even just close your eyes and ask yourself, where and when do you feel really strong, very confident, and you have a sense of power? And this may even just be when you're exercising or playing a sport, or maybe nothing comes to mind and you make something up. Maybe you imagine something. So I feel like this taps into all of this energy. The Pluto, the Jupiter and Scorpio, and then especially the Mars and Saturn I want to get us all thinking and tuning into that feeling of being powerful, of we're the ones that are in our own authority. So the more that we can, just even think of those situations and then notice themes and hopefully start to practice more of those, we can bring that power into our lives in a more practical way as well.
That's excellent. And, Shawna, I love how you turn that away. You could have been, or turn that around. You could have been right where you don't feel powerful, and where you feel, I love how you turned it to really focus on where you do have that power. And I will definitely be doing that action item. So if you're out there doing that action item, we'd love for you to share. So Shawna, tell us how they can get involved with all that sharing and, in the podcast in general.
Yeah, so other ways to get involved with the podcast are to become a patron of this podcast to show your appreciation. And when you're a patron, you can also get those really cool show notes with all the times and the tarot cards and the quotes, etc. And so the best way to get that is on our Instagram or Facebook, Feminine Principle Podcast. And yeah, we would love to connect with you in that way.
Yes, absolutely. And speaking of Facebook, if you happen to have missed our live Facebook segment from last week's full moon, you can watch the replay at the Feminine Principle podcast page. So go check us out there. And you can check us out. Speaking of checking us out, well, if you want to find us, you can find me at energeticprinciples.com. And you can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at Energetic Principles. So Shawna, where can they find you?
You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube under Neo Feminine Astrology.
Yes, and we are out there every day just sharing fun tidbits, and we love to share and see what you're up to as well. So hit us up. So yeah, it's been a great episode. Any last words, Shawna?
Yeah, sending lots of love and asking that if you enjoy this podcast, please share it with a friend and leave us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes or our Facebook page. And subscribe to make sure that you get future episodes the moment that they're published.
Yes. Just as a reminder, that is at midnight on Sundays, Pacific time. So please do spread the word, because that's the best thing you can do for us is to, share what we've shared with you. And we thank you for that. So that being said, we also thank you so much for tuning in. So until next time, may the stars be with you.
Namaste.